got to have a socialist perspective.
Problem of how to organize industrial society on truly democratic lines.
That all the tides of history are flowing in our direction.
Hi.
Hello, welcome back to the Barnet Revolutionary Front channel. We're going to start a new series that we are going to film on Saturdays and hopefully also upload, but where we're going to be going over the news of the week. So basically just going to be talking about some of the main headlines, maybe some more niche ones that interest us, and we're just going to have a little chat about them. So, Gregory, tell me what's happening in the news.
So, obvious big one is that the UK has become the country with the highest death toll in the whole of Europe, overtaking Italy and Spain. The UK currently is 31,241. Italy's death toll is just a bit lower at 30,201, and so obviously it's a grim milestone, and reiterates a lot of what we said the past episode. And with that, there is talks of relaxing social distancing as the death tolls decrease and the infection rate also decreases. So that includes, well, we don't know anything till Sunday tomorrow, but it could be schools being reopened in June, garden centres are being reopened, I think outdoor pub areas are also being reopened, and so we've got that to look forward to. And around that, there's also unions who are concerned for their workers and concerned for the implications of lack of regulations around social distancing in workplaces, and with the reopening of a lot of workplaces. What about you? Yeah. What have you read this week?
Well, yeah, I just think on that very interesting stuff, I sort of confirmed some of the things we were saying in our podcast, I think, that we've overtaken certain other countries. The most interesting thing I read was about China's wolf warriors. Now, if you don't know what they are, it's the diplomatic overseas branch of sort of the Chinese politics, led by the foreign ministry spokesman, Zhao Lijian. And now they're called wolf warriors because it comes from the sort of Chinese set of films. And what they are is they are sort of staunchly protecting the Chinese response to COVID-19. So obviously we've heard all about Trump blaming it on China, saying it comes from China. Funnily enough, his own Secret Service disagrees with that. So, but also sort of the most overt case of these wolf warriors in action was after the Australian government said they wanted to launch an inquiry into where COVID-19 came from, to which the Chinese ambassador in Sydney said that this would damage Chinese-Australian relations. He said a lot of Chinese tourists would reconsider their destinations. A lot of students maybe wouldn't want to go into what he labeled as potentially hostile environment, and maybe Chinese people will stop buying Australian beef, stop buying Australian wine. And I think this is pretty interesting. So this has been happening, across the world. Obviously, the economy's in free fall, and people are questioning, how much of this is China's fault? Did China do this? China's doing it, okay. And that these wolf warriors are really showing that they're absolutely not having it. They're not messing around. It's not gaining them any fans across the world. Obviously, I think it's mostly to unite the Chinese people behind their communist leadership. But I think it's very interesting, and I think Trump's sort of rhetoric of it's Chinese has really helped them, because whenever Trump says something on the national stage, he basically makes that idea worth less. So even if he's potentially right, he's saying it based on no evidence, and so they can very easily demonize him. And the main guy, Zhao Lijian, I hope I'm saying that right, the spokesman, he's even gone so far as to say it was US soldiers that brought the virus into Wuhan and unleashed it on China. So I think that's pretty interesting tidbit of news. I think that could go interestingly with what we were talking about, whether countries will move to the Chinese model, because these wolf warriors are not doing any favors for China on the international stage. yeah, Greg, do you have any thoughts on that? What that might represent?
Uh, Chinese expansionism has mainly been thrust through by its ability to fund infrastructure projects and other projects in the third world. I think this particular case is, I mean, the WHO has come out and said that determining the origin of COVID-19 might take a year or maybe even more time, but it does seem quite likely that this came out the same place that SARS did, which is also coronavirus, which is wet markets in China. But yeah, I think Trump has a lot of propaganda potential in demonizing and bringing to the forefront China rather than the role of his government or
Yeah, I think he's clearly
yeah.
doing it to deflect some kind of blame.
Mhm.
A country that hasn't needed to deflect blame is Germany. Germany has seemed to do very considerably well during this COVID
Mm.
crisis.
Yeah.
They have the lowest per capita death rate in Europe, I think. They have much lower deaths than Italy or Spain or England. And the article I read about this referred to the doctors as gods in white, which is apparently a term used in Germany to talk about their doctors. And it's
Okay.
interesting because it's a mix of respect, genuine respect, but also there's undertones of the doctors are too big for their boots in some ways. But I think it's very interesting. It seemed, and so reading more in this article, it was implying, and I think correctly so, that Germany had done much better because they have a much more decentralized system. So
Mm.
they don't need to go through the sort of typical issues of democracy, and it's a long time to come to a decision, because you have all the leaders of the separate, of Bavaria, of all the other not counties. One state, you see
It's
that in that they were much quicker to react. Um, but so I thought it was quite an interesting article about and also about how many more doctors there are in Germany per 1,000 people or whatever. No, per
mm.
100,000. I think they have something like I don't remember, but it was I think maybe 40-50% higher than it is in England or in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very interesting. What do you think about that, Greg? Why? And also, talking about how Germany's done well on the state level, why weren't the American states able to jump into action in the same way? Do you think?
I mean, the ability of the individual states to deal with their own issues is a massive factor of that, because when you're dealing with an epidemic, these are clusters around the country. And I'm not sure about, I mean, take just England for a second. There's a lot of switching around of authority. So there's trusts that there were some things, local authorities that saw some things, but with pandemics, they're dealt with Public Health England, which is an independent body from all of these trusts. And so it's a highly centralized situation in which it requires an extremely intense centralized bureaucracy in the health service to deal with it, which we did not have, in which America, again, a highly privatized system, can't itself also deal with. I mean, one issue is obviously access, and Andrew Cuomo, for example, the governor of New York, cut Medicaid, which is sort of a subsidy for health insurance for people who can't really afford the extortionate rates in America for healthcare insurance, and he cut that in the latest budget for New York, and the effect of an increasing inability to access healthcare services. And you see in Germany a decentralized system with enough infrastructure can have a better effect and a better ability to take care of the situation.
Yeah, I think maybe the last thing on our daily news or weekly news, not daily. We're not doing this every day. We should talk about VE Day, I reckon. So
Mm.
Victory in Europe Day. That was celebrated in the UK yesterday. It's a very big deal here. I don't know
Mm.
how much of a deal it is, across the country, but here it's a big deal. Going on my daily walk, I saw a lot of Union Jacks hanging out of windows, a lot more than I expected actually. I was quite
Mm.
I was quite surprised. And I know every year on VE Day, me and my mum have basically the same conversation for breakfast, where we talk about how VE Day it really shouldn't be a day to celebrate how great England is. It should be a day to, be thankful for the fact that fascism in Europe was defeated.
Mm.
But it somehow has become, in my eyes, quite a nationalist, quite patriotic holiday here, which, the irony of that is unfathomable, and it really gets on my nerves because, victory in Europe was achieved after, a months-long campaign of, millions of Russians dying in Eastern Europe, thousands on their thousands dying in Berlin, to take the Reichstag, and then they finally did it, and that was, that was it basically. I think,
Where are the
I don't want
flags
to
of
undermine.
Stalin? Sorry.
I don't want to undermine the British effort, and obviously lots of brave soldiers died. But I think now we potentially remember, we commemorate VE Day in the wrong ways by,
Mm.
celebrating our national identity rather than celebrating the fact that, we defeated a horrible, horrible regime that was killing millions and millions of people. But that's my 2 cents. What do you think, Gregory?
There's this quite interesting book on nationalism, and really the first one by Benedict Anderson called Imagined Communities: The Origins and Spread of Nationalism. And for him, a really important part of nationalism is death, because death has this unifying lateralization insofar as everyone is equal when they die. And the sort of people that receive Victorian crosses are the Gurkhas, from the empire, from the colonies, but also commanders or lieutenants who died trying to protect the lives of the working class infantry or something like this. So it's very lateralizing, and it also so it's a death and celebration of commemoration of those who's died is an important function of nationalism as a whole, because it paints this picture of the country that is far more rosy and far more equal than it really is, and we can forget about the grave injustices in any country by understanding the fact that we are all equal when we die.
I mean, the military is very unifying as an institute. Yeah, I mean, I do find it interesting. Even within the military, it's we don't have a day to remember the British soldiers that died for their country in the Crimea, and I think it's because we don't know if we were on the right side in the Crimea. Were we? God knows. There's two ways of looking at it, but
I think because it was so far away.
So far away.
Time-wise? Yeah, time-wise. It was like in the 1870s, 60s.
I mean, but what about the Korean Wars? We don't remember.
I think they're forgotten because it was I don't know. It's a forgotten war, the Crimean War. Sorry, no, the Crimean or the Korean?
I said Korean.
The Korean War is weirdly because it's a weirdly forgotten war. I think because it didn't drag on for so long, but also in the aftermath of the Korean War, there were two dictatorships. People forget that in South Korea, those are also pretty vile, repressive dictatorships in South Korea. But I think also World War I was so spectacularly brutal. I mean, the Crimean War was like many wars that happened in the 19th century.
They were just as brutal.
So
just as horrendous.
What, World War I or as compared to the Crimean War?
No, I think Crimea was just as horrendous as World War One.
I doubt that. Oh, we can have that conversation later.
Yeah.
What was I going to say?
Back to the weekly news.
Yeah. So the Crimean War was like a localized war. I mean, look at World War I, and it's a massive war containing the vast majority of Europe and the European colonies. And World War II especially. And World War II also has a wonderful sort of propaganda power, because it is these democracies against the hordes of Nazism,
Well, so I think that's been the weekly news. Bit of a divergence at the end, but hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something about the news this week that you didn't know previously. Maybe we've given you some insight onto things you already did know about. Enjoy your week. be ready
Yeah.
for our next podcast. It's a good one.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
comrades.
Enjoy. Much love. Stay safe, comrades.